Welcome to a story of deception, obsession, and manipulation. A tale where love, desperation, and secrecy twist into something dark and sinister. This is the story of Twisted Promises. Meet Claire Thompson, a 17-year-old high school student caught in the depths of introspection, navigating her own feelings in a way that feels both thrilling and terrifying. She's an introvert, blending into the scenery of her life with ease, rarely drawing attention to herself but observing everyone around her. The small, tight-knit town of Willow Creek is as much a comfort as it is a cage. The air, thick with pine and wildflower scents, is filled with voices that echo from porch swings and diner booths, the familiarity of it all pressing down on her like a weight. It was at Willow Creek High School, a place buzzing with the unrestrained energy of youth, that her life took an unexpected turn. The school itself was an extension of the town's charm, with halls full of friends who'd known each other since kindergarten, lockers covered in stickers and photos, and classrooms with windows that looked out onto the Appalachian foothills. Here, every student seemed to have found their place, fitting into roles they wore like badges. But Claire, unsure of herself, felt like an outsider even among the familiar faces. When her mother remarried, Claire's world shifted. She didn't know what to expect from a new family dynamic, especially with a new stepbrother. Then she met him, Ethan. She first saw him leaning against the hood of his car in the driveway, his posture exuding a relaxed confidence that was foreign to her. He had a certain allure, the kind that draws people in and keeps them there as if pulled by gravity. His dark hair fell carelessly over his brow, and his easy smile hinted at a charm he knew how to wield well. The way he carried himself, self-assured, unbothered, immediately set him apart from the boys Claire had grown up with. Ethan noticed her too. His gaze lingered a little too long, his smile coming a little too easily. He was attentive in a way that made her feel both seen and vulnerable, aware of the gap between her reserved nature and his charismatic energy. Ethan had a knack for knowing what people wanted to hear, and with Claire he seemed to understand her loneliness before she even admitted it to herself. Their first real encounter was in the kitchen one evening when the rest of the family had gone out, leaving them alone. He leaned against the counter, watching her with an intensity that made her heart race, and asked her about her hobbies, her favorite places in town, the little things she thought no one noticed. His interest in her felt genuine, his attention unwavering. The way he looked at her made her feel as if she was the only person in the room, the only person he'd ever been truly interested in. Ethan's attention became like a lifeline for Claire, drawing her out of the shadows she'd hidden in for so long. With him, she felt different, like she was stepping into a version of herself she had never known. Their friendship turned into something more over time, a fire kindled by stolen moments and glances that lingered too long. Claire, a quiet and introspective girl, often found solace in the art room, where the world around her faded as she lost herself in her sketches and paintings. Her vivid imagination painted the reality she sometimes struggled to accept. With her father absent and her mother busy managing life after her recent remarriage, Claire felt more isolated than ever. Her art became an escape, a canvas for her unspoken feelings and hidden desires. It was during one fateful summer evening on June 20th, 2020, as the golden hues of the setting sun bathed the town in warmth, that Claire first found herself drawn to Ethan, her new stepbrother. With his arrival, the dynamics of her home shifted dramatically. Ethan, with his charismatic smile and effortless charm, was everything Claire admired, confident, adventurous, and full of life. At first, she tried to brush it off as a fleeting fascination, a simple admiration of his outgoing nature that so contrasted with her own. Their initial meetings were innocent enough, a shared meal, awkward conversations, and the kind of banter that comes with navigating new family dynamics. But as they spent more time together, Claire's feelings began to evolve, transforming from admiration to something deeper and more complex. There was a chemistry between them, a connection that felt both exhilarating and terrifying. On the evening of June 30th, at a party hosted by mutual friends, Claire's feelings became undeniable. She had noticed a guy from school flirting with her, his advances growing increasingly bold. Just as she was trying to brush him off, Ethan appeared, a dark intensity in his eyes that she hadn't seen before. Without hesitation, he stepped in, shoving the guy back, his voice low but laced with anger. It was the first time anyone had stood up for her with such possessiveness. And in that heated moment, as she watched him defend her, a realization dawned. She had fallen in love with her stepbrother. The realization hit her hard, a wave of emotions crashing over her. She couldn't deny it any longer. She felt something powerful for Ethan, something she knew she shouldn't feel. But more than that, she realized he wasn't indifferent to her either. His protective reaction, the look in his eyes, the way his hand lingered on her shoulder afterward, it all pointed to a mutual attraction. What they shared went beyond the superficial or the familial. It was a spark that neither of them could ignore. Their interactions changed after that night. No longer just step-siblings, they became confidants, sharing secrets and dreams they hadn't shared with anyone else. Their bond, once tentative, grew stronger, forming a connection that felt like both a blessing and a curse. Ethan had always known how to charm people, the kind of person who could light up a room with a smile or make anyone feel like they were the only one that mattered. He thrived on the attention and admiration he drew effortlessly, always in control of those around him. When Claire's mother married his father, he was quick to notice the shy, reserved girl who suddenly became his stepsister. In her eyes, he saw a depth of feeling that was vulnerable and raw, a need for connection, a yearning for acceptance. Claire's innocence and admiration for him were all he needed to see that she would be easy to mold, to pull into his orbit. After that night at the party, Ethan began to court Claire subtly, showing signs of attention that seemed innocent to everyone around them, but carried a weight she couldn't ignore. He knew exactly how to get her attention, offering just enough affection to keep her in trance while keeping up the appearance of a friendly brotherly relationship around others. He'd invite her out on walks to the lake, where they'd spend hours talking about their lives, their hopes and their dreams. Or they'd wander through the secluded trails in the woods, where the only witnesses were the whispering leaves and their shadows intertwined. To Claire, these gestures felt like love, like someone finally seeing her for who she was. But for Ethan, it was about control, knowing he could bend her emotions to his will. What began as a playful, flirtatious connection soon ignited into a full-blown affair. By day, they were siblings, smiling for family photos and passing the salt at dinner, each keeping up the pretense of normalcy. But once night fell, their hidden romance took over, consuming them in passion and secrecy. Every secret meeting, every stolen kiss only intensified their bond, drawing them deeper into a relationship that felt equal parts exhilarating and dangerous. They spent the entire summer wrapped up in each other, savoring the forbidden thrill, heedless of the risks. But with each night of passion, the stakes grew higher. The weight of their secret began to loom over them, and the reckless freedom they had savored over the summer started to feel like a trap. They both knew that something this intense couldn't stay hidden forever. And as the summer faded, a quiet fear settled between them, an awareness that the love they shared might just be powerful enough to destroy them both. As summer turned to autumn, Willow Creek's landscape shifted from lush green to brilliant hues of amber and crimson, casting a nostalgic, almost haunting beauty over the town. The streets were now blanketed in fallen leaves, the air crisp and fragrant with the smell of wood smoke and pine. But for Claire, the warmth she'd once found in Ethan's presence began to smolder, transforming into something she couldn't quite name. The glances they shared, once innocent and filled with possibility, had taken on an intensity that felt both thrilling and unsettling. Ethan's demeanor had changed, his once casual interest now sharpened, his gaze heavier. He became more possessive, wanting to know every part of her life, the friends she spent time with, the books she read, even the idle thoughts that wandered through her mind. Each question was delivered with a smile, each request cloaked in affection, and Claire, trusting and in love, took it all as proof of his devotion. In their late-night talks, she poured her heart out to him, unaware that with each secret she revealed, she was binding herself tighter to him. His reassurances, his whispers of how he'd always protect her, were like fuel to her feelings, making her believe their love was something epic, something that could conquer anything. But with every boundary Ethan crossed, his grip on her tightened. He began to pull her away from friends, subtly implying that they didn't understand her the way he did, that no one could ever know her as deeply as he did. What had once felt like sweet protectiveness started to resemble control, but Claire, starved for attention and unconditional acceptance, misinterpreted his behavior as love. To her, it was proof that he couldn't stand the thought of losing her. In truth, Ethan was creating a world where only he existed, a world where her thoughts, her feelings, and even her independence were slowly stripped away. He became her everything, her only confidant and source of validation. She couldn't see the manipulation behind his intense care. All she felt was the exhilaration of being wanted so completely. But as the days grew colder, so did her spirit, caught in a web she hadn't realized she'd entered, bound by promises that were as twisted as the love she'd found herself trapped in. One crisp day on October 25th, as the autumn wind swept through Willow Creek, Sarah decided to surprise Claire with an unannounced visit. She wanted to invite her to her upcoming party, a small celebration among close friends. But as Sarah let herself in and quietly made her way through the familiar hallways of Claire's house, she sensed something was off. The usual quietness felt thicker, as though cloaked in secrecy. Following the faint sounds from upstairs, Sarah's curiosity quickly turned to shock when she opened the door to Claire's room, finding her best friend tangled in bed with Ethan. Time seemed to freeze as Sarah took in the scene before her. She locked eyes with Claire, her face a mixture of fear and shame, while Ethan's expression turned cold, calculating, his mind racing for a way to contain the situation. Sarah stumbled backward, her initial shock quickly turning to anger and betrayal. This was more than she'd ever anticipated. All the small clues she had overlooked now came crashing together in a whirlwind of hurt and disbelief. Claire's heart sank. She could see the realization dawning on Sarah's face, a whirlwind of emotions sweeping through her best friend. As she struggled to find words, Ethan quickly interjected, his voice calm yet firm, subtly threatening. In an instant, he turned to Claire, convincing her that Sarah's discovery meant only one thing. Everything they had built, their secret world, was at risk. She could see the danger in his gaze, the desperation that brooked no refusal. "She can't keep this quiet," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "You know what happens if she tells." Feeling trapped, Claire found herself pulled even deeper into Ethan's twisted reality. He reminded her of all the whispered promises, the sacrifices they'd made, the love they had sworn to protect. If Sarah spoke out, their lives, their reputations, everything would crumble. Slowly, Ethan's words took root in her mind, twisting her loyalty and love into something darker. In that charged moment, a plan was born between them, a promise to keep their secret safe, no matter the cost. The pact they'd shared, once founded in passion, now morphed into a dark bond of secrecy and survival. With the scales tipped, Claire understood that what had once been her escape from loneliness was now her prison, bound to Ethan in a pact that demanded a price she could never have imagined. In the days that followed Sarah's shocking discovery, Claire tried desperately to convince her best friend to keep quiet. She cornered Sarah in the school library one afternoon, her voice low and pleading. She poured out her heart, explaining that she loved Ethan, that their connection wasn't something she could simply erase. But Sarah's face remained stony, her gaze full of disgust and betrayal. "This isn't love, Claire," she said, her voice shaking with conviction. "It's a disease, a sickness that's taken over you." From that day on, Sarah distanced herself, making her disdain public. In the crowded halls of Willow Creek High, she would pointedly turn her back whenever she passed Claire and Ethan, making sure others noticed her disapproval. Whispers spread among their peers, fragments of rumors taking shape, as Sarah's silent but evident rejection left Claire feeling more isolated than ever. Driven to the edge, Claire returned to Ethan, desperate to keep their love safe. He wrapped his arm around her, his voice soothing, promising that they could control the situation, that no one would tear them apart. Together, they devised a plan, a twisted scheme to silence Sarah forever, one that relied on secrecy, deception, and careful planning. Every detail was mapped out to ensure no one would suspect them, but beneath the surface, doubts and guilt began to eat away at Claire. As the days wore on, Claire's resolve faltered. Her conscience stirred, her once clear feelings for Ethan clouded by fear and shame. She could no longer ignore the nagging voice that warned her of the darkness she was slipping into. But Ethan's presence loomed over her, his hold tightening as he reminded her of their promises, of everything they'd risked to be together. The weight of their pact pressed down on her like an impending storm, leaving her trapped between the man she loved and the horrifying plan they were about to set in motion. On that fateful, cold, moonlit night of November 5th, Claire and Ethan put their plan into motion. They lured Sarah out to the abandoned railroad tracks on the edge of town, a desolate spot where shadows danced beneath the flickering light of a nearby street lamp. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the distant sound of a train whistle, a haunting reminder of the danger lurking nearby. As they waited, the tension in the air thickened. Claire's heart raced with a mix of fear and guilt, but Ethan stood beside her, his presence radiating a sinister calmness. Sarah arrived, her expression one of confusion and concern as she spotted Claire and Ethan standing together. Sarah approached the abandoned railroad tracks, her expression cautious. Claire's heart ached at the sight of her friend, but Ethan's grip tightened on her shoulder, grounding her in a resolve she couldn't shake. Ethan stepped forward, his charming smile masking the storm brewing beneath. He moved closer to Sarah, the tension in the air thickening as his demeanor shifted from inviting to menacing. The weight of the moment pressed heavily on Claire, a whirlwind of emotions swirling within her as she grappled with the impending horror. The atmosphere was charged with unspoken dread, and as Sarah took in the scene, she felt a chill run down her spine, unaware of the true danger lurking just beneath the surface. In that moment, everything changed, and Claire's world began to spiral into darkness. In a split second, everything turned. As the distant rumble of a train grew louder, Ethan lunged forward, pushing Sarah with all his might. The shock of his betrayal registered too late in Sarah's eyes as she stumbled toward the tracks, her screams swallowed by the deafening sound of the train barreling down the line. "No, Sarah!" Claire screamed, the horror of the moment crashing over her like a tidal wave. She lunged forward, but it was too late. Sarah fell onto the tracks, and the train's lights illuminated the scene in a blinding flash. Time slowed as Claire watched, helpless, as Sarah's figure was consumed by the rushing train. The sound of metal grinding against metal was drowned out by Claire's heart-wrenching sobs. She was frozen in place, her mind racing with disbelief and despair. Ethan stood beside her, an eerie calmness in his demeanor, as if he had just removed an obstacle from their path. Claire's heart shattered, realizing the depth of Ethan's darkness. The twisted promises they had made now felt like chains binding her to a past she could never escape. The weight of what had just happened crashed down on her, overwhelming her with guilt and horror. A couple of days later, as the town begins to suspect foul play in Sarah's disappearance, whispers start to circulate. Claire's withdrawal and erratic behavior raise eyebrows, and the guilt festering inside her finally reaches a breaking point. She contemplates going to the authorities, hoping for some form of redemption, but Ethan intercepts her, reminding her of the pact they made, a pact of silence and secrecy that could destroy them both. Feeling trapped, Claire isolates herself even more, haunted by visions of Sarah and the irreversible choices she made. Meanwhile, Ethan's grip on her tightens, turning more possessive and controlling as he fears she'll expose him. However, Claire makes a choice. She goes to the police, confessing everything, not just to unburden herself, but also to prevent Ethan from controlling her any longer. Her confession sends shockwaves through the town. In a haunting twist, Ethan shows no remorse for Sarah's death, revealing to Claire just how little their relationship truly meant to him. He only saw her as someone he could manipulate. Heartbroken and shattered, Claire faces the consequences of her actions, but there is a glimmer of peace as she finally breaks free from Ethan's control. The trial of Claire Thompson for the murder of Sarah Blake became the focal point of Willow Creek, drawing the attention of the entire community. Claire sat at the defendant's table, her face pale and her hands trembling. Ethan sat behind her, his demeanor composed, yet a smirk danced on his lips as he watched the proceedings unfold. The prosecution painted a damning picture of Claire as a manipulative teenager who, driven by jealousy and desperation, conspired with Ethan to eliminate her best friend. They presented evidence of their clandestine meetings, texts exchanged between Claire and Ethan, and a chilling account of Sarah's final moments as told by witnesses who had seen the girls arguing on the night of the murder. Claire's defense team struggled to counter the prosecution's narrative. They argued that Claire was a victim of Ethan's manipulation, a young girl caught in a web of emotional abuse and control. They brought forth testimonies from Claire's mother and teachers, who described Claire as introverted and vulnerable, emphasizing the profound impact of her fractured home life and Ethan's charm that initially drew her in. Claire, in her own testimony, recounted her love for Sarah and how the events spiraled out of control, leading to a moment of panic that resulted in tragedy. Her voice quivered as she expressed her remorse, declaring that she never intended for Sarah to be harmed. As the trial continued, tension mounted. Ethan's demeanor shifted from supportive stepbrother to the distant, cold manipulator. After several weeks of testimony and deliberation, the jury finally reached a verdict. The courtroom was silent, the air thick with anticipation as the judge entered. Claire sat, anxiously twisting her hands in her lap, and Ethan's expression was unreadable. Gasps echoed through the courtroom as the judge returned a verdict against Claire. Claire Thompson, guilty of second-degree murder. Claire's heart sank, tears welling in her eyes as she looked at her mother, who was visibly shaken. The reality of the verdict crashed over her like a wave, drowning her in despair. The judge continued, "Claire Thompson, you are hereby sentenced to 15 years in a juvenile detention facility, with the possibility of parole after 10 years, taking into account the circumstances surrounding your involvement and the fact that you were a minor at the time of the crime." Ethan watched with a mix of satisfaction and disbelief, realizing that Claire would face the consequences for their actions while he remained free to spin his narrative. As Claire was led away in handcuffs, her heart ached not just for the loss of her friend, but also for the betrayal of the one person she had trusted the most. The twisted promises they had made now felt like chains binding her to a past she could never escape. In the years that followed, the community grappled with the implications of the trial. Claire's story became a cautionary tale of love turned toxic, of how the lines between affection and manipulation can blur, leading to devastating consequences. As she navigated her time in detention, Claire found a flicker of hope in therapy sessions, learning to confront her demons and understand the choices that had led her down such a dark path. Meanwhile, Ethan, free and unpunished, continued to weave his charm in Willow Creek, masking his true nature as a master manipulator. The town would never forget the tragedy that unfolded, forever haunted by the memory of Sarah Blake and the twisted promises that led to her untimely demise. Thank you for watching Twisted Promises, a tragic reminder of the consequences of secrets, manipulation, and obsession. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more thrilling tales of love, betrayal, and dark secrets.